Yeah, let's jump into that college football that you already hinted at with the SEC woes that we have seen with the coronavirus. I mentioned Alabama. You mentioned the LSU Florida game, the Mizzou Vandy game. Do you think this Bama game's going to join that list? I mean, what I saw was Nick Saban, as soon as he found out he tested positive, left that facility rather promptly to try to limit his exposure to his team.
Yeah, it's interesting because they say it takes about 3 days for it to show up in the next person, right? So 3 days from Wednesday, Higgins, is Saturday morning, and they are supposed to play Georgia on Saturday night. So that is a concerning timeline for me personally. I will not be betting that game, but there was some line movement actually. It went from 6.5 to 4.5. Alabama was minus 6.5. Now they're minus 4.5. That kind of makes sense. Saban's worth a few points. I definitely think that.
Saban's worth 2 points, but not a field goal. And if you've seen the kicking troubles that the Rolling Tide have had over the years, that 2 point movement instead of three kind of makes a little bit of sense, I think.
There's an Auburn game I remember, maybe just one.
Well, we have Thursday and Friday night games going on as well. Georgia State at Arkansas State. Arkansas State's a 3.5 point favorite. That's the Thursday night game. And then there's two Friday night games. SMU is a 6.5 point favorite over Tulane, and BYU is a 5.5 point favorite over Houston. Any thoughts on those three games?
I'm gonna be honest. I'm hoping we have two baseball games to watch on Friday. Still, maybe hoping. But
Fingers
if
crossed.
if not, BYU Houston is definitely the game to watch that night. Houston had a big comeback actually against Tulane last week, and BYU's looked pretty good all year. So I'd be excited to watch those two offenses.
I think SMU's look pretty good as well. Are they a full touchdown better than Tulane? That should be interesting to see. But you are right. If there is some playoff baseball on Friday, that's definitely what channel I am going to be on. Let's move on to Saturday, though, Brett. Before you give out one of your picks, I'm going to talk about this Clemson Georgia Tech game real quick because I think the Tigers are just going to steamroll the Yellow Jackets. I mean, Clemson 4-0. They truly do look like the number one team in the country right now, whereas Georgia Tech, yeah, they're 2-1 in the ACC, but that one loss is to Syracuse, and it's not in a very impressive game that they lost. Not to mention, they played Louisville rather well to rebound, but I just don't know if I can believe in this Georgia Tech team and Clemson to win by 4 touchdowns. I see it, so give me the Tigers minus 27.5.
Yeah, I guess the biggest concern for me is Clemson would go up too big again, and then they take their foot off the gas, pull the starters, and Georgia Tech starters might still be in, and all of a sudden you lose by 24. But I think 27.5 is reasonable enough where Clemson may be able to get up big enough, and Georgia Tech might not be able to score enough to get it back under 28. So that's right on that borderline for me of if the spread's too big or if it's just reasonable enough.
Yeah, and to your point about Clemson getting ahead too early, it's kind of been the trend considering Clemson is 1-3 against the spread so far this season.
Oh
They may be
yeah.
4-0, but they're 1-3 against the spread.
Oh yeah, opening night was a terrible beat for bettors who had Clemson against the spread because that game was cooked, and then all of a sudden in the fourth quarter, it was not cooked. But
Well,
I'm
you
on a
got a
few.
mid-major, right?
Yeah, I'm on a few games, but I definitely want to talk about one of my favorite games of the week, Cincinnati at Tulsa. Tulsa's actually only played ranked opponents, Higgins, and they're 1-1. So Tulsa's not a bad opponent. Cincinnati, the number 8 team in the country currently, led by a really good quarterback, Riddler. Very talented kid. Minus 3.5 at Tulsa. I think Cincinnati's playing with expectations that they might be able to sneak into the playoff in a weird year if they get all their games in and some of these other teams don't. So I think Cincinnati's going to go out there and show everyone what they're made of. Minus 3.5. This is Tulsa's third ranked opponent of the season, so that's a lot for Tulsa to have to deal with in their first 3 weeks.
Yeah, Tulsa lost to number 11 Oklahoma State, then beat number 11 UCF, and now they're facing off and hosting number 8 Cincinnati. Tulsa is 2-0 against the spread, held Oklahoma State to just 16 points to start their season, so I think this is a tough task, tougher than it looks like it would be on paper when you see Cincinnati versus Tulsa on the book. But I think this should be an interesting game. Cincinnati minus 3.5 shows how close the book expects it to be. And I like your point of maybe Cincinnati trying to sneak in on one of those off years, but with how Cincinnati versus Tulsa looks on paper, I think Cincinnati needs to get a commanding win if that were to be the case. They can't just win this by 4 points.
No, I mean, Cincinnati's got to win and win convincingly all their games because people are always going to be arguing for the one loss SEC team or, oh, this undefeated team in the Pac 12 that only played 6 games should be in because, they went undefeated in the Pac 12. Well, Cincinnati's not going to get any of the benefit of the doubt. I just think they have a lot of talent. They're going to have the opportunity to get a win against UCF because that's a conference game. They'll have another opportunity to get some ranked wins. So they might be able to do just enough, Higgins. In a weird year like this, just enough.
Who knows in 2020? Who knows?
Well, it's not a good year for our Syracuse Orange in 2020. I know that. We lost our starting safety, Andre Cisco, who's going to the NFL draft, but we lost him because of injury. Tommy DeVito's out due to injury. And we're 2.5 point dogs at home versus Liberty, Higgins.
I like it, and I'm going to take Syracuse on the money line because of it. Give me the plus money of Syracuse against the undefeated Liberty team that's played nobody. I mean, yeah, they've had some strong wins. I mean, both of their last 2 wins, they held the opposing team to just 7 points. But they didn't really play anyone. They played University of Louisiana Monroe and UNA, North Alabama. Excuse me, I had to click on that to find out what the abbreviation was. That's how bad it is. Syracuse, however, played 2 quality opponents in the past 2 weeks, went 1-1 with a win against Georgia Tech and Duke. I think Syracuse is starting to look a little bit better than they did earlier in the season. Rex Culpepper showed some flashes when he's had to go in, so who knows? I'll bet on the Orange here to see if they can get their second win.
This is not a shot at Rex Culpepper. That kid has been through a lot in his time at Syracuse, and
Yes, he has.
I'm a big fan of his as a person. Coming back from cancer, being able to play on the football team now, he's going to have a chance to start. But just to make a little bit of a joke of the situation, Higgins, I'd have more confidence with Joe Girard playing quarterback, 2-time state champion in high school, now the starting point guard on the Syracuse basketball team. You think we can get back under center?
I think Dino may have reached out to him. Who
I
knows?
really
I
hope
mean,
so. I mean, that would be a more intriguing option to me. Just throwing it out there. But heading back to the SEC, one of the games that hasn't been stopped by COVID, Auburn at South Carolina. Auburn 3.5 point favorites. Honestly, Higgins, I just think South Carolina's a bad football team, and I'm going to take Auburn.
fair enough. That's a rather simple reason, but I get you. Why do you think the line's at 3.5 if you think South Carolina's so bad, though?
Auburn's been a little disappointing. They have not come out and looked great. Bo Nix hasn't looked great, but I think Auburn, top to bottom, is better than South Carolina. I think, honestly, their quarterback plays better. They have more wide receiver talent. Their defense is probably a little bit stronger as well. So I just think they're the better football team. And, I think they should be able to beat South Carolina by at least a touchdown. I was surprised this spread was only 3.5.
See, your reasoning with that game is pretty similar to my reasoning in this North Carolina Florida State game. I mean, Florida State's just horrible. They've had to sub out their coach due to coronavirus reasons. They've played 3 different quarterbacks this season. They are 1-3 with their only win against Jacksonville State, and it wasn't pretty. Meanwhile, North Carolina had a amazing game against Virginia Tech last week, 56-45 win. Virginia Tech's now ranked this week. North Carolina's ranked number 5, and they are only 13.5-point favorites. I think they win by more than 2 touchdowns here. I think this is an easy decision.
Yeah, a little side note, Sam Howell, UNC starting quarterback, was committed to Florida State before Mac Brown got him to switch over to UNC. So maybe a little bad blood there. I don't know. Maybe that comes into it. Who knows? But yeah, this one seemed a little small. I guess UNC, the beginning of the year, that close game kind of scared some people. Maybe that has something to do with it as well, Higgins. What do you think about any of that?
Well, I think UNC in the beginning of the year may have scared some people off. I mean, against Syracuse, who we have talked
Right.
about, hasn't really impressed people. They only scored 31, but
Well,
they
and
held them to 6.
it was really the fourth quarter where they scored. Like they were bad for 3 quarters. You were sitting there like, oh my
Yes.
god, we might win.
But they've since straightened it out. And I mean, if you look at how the averages are in terms of points allowed versus points scored, North Carolina scored 37.7 and allowed 24.3. So that's basically right on the mark with this spread.
Yeah, I like that pick. I think UNC should take care of business. I think Sam Howell's going to go in there and try and light up that defense for sure. Sticking in the ACC, I'm going down to the Research Triangle, Higgins, down in Raleigh, North Carolina, as Duke plays NC State, and NC State is a 4.5-point favorite at home versus Duke. NC State is the better football team than Duke in this one. They're the home team. I think they can beat Duke by a touchdown. Duke coming off a win last week against Syracuse, but as you and I mentioned earlier, it doesn't really impress us too much. We've watched this Syracuse team play.
The Battle of North Carolina should be interesting, though, between Duke and North Carolina State. I mean, UNC's not there. I'm sure they'd like to be a part of that battle as well, but you can only have 2 North Carolina teams facing off at a time. That's COVID rules, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the only reason. Otherwise, we'd throw in Wake Forest, have them out there, get all the teams in there.
Get all the teams on there. 1v1v1v1.
Yeah. One more game I want to touch on before we move on, Higgins. Ole Miss at Arkansas, and I got to tell you, this is the most not surprising, but probably the biggest over/under I've ever seen on a college football game before the game kicked off.
Other than Big 12?
No, period. Like, I don't think I've
Oh,
ever seen 75.5 pre-kickoff. I've seen it, in the second quarter when a game's gotten pretty high scoring in the first quarter, but 75.5
11 touchdowns.
at least.
At least 11 touchdowns. That is a very high over-under. I will say last week I picked the over-under in the Texas-Oklahoma game. That was 72.5. That did a hit, but 72.5 is not 75.5.
And Felipe Franks isn't playing quarterback for one of those teams. So, it's 75.5. That was a big number. I don't know if I trust Arkansas to score enough I definitely trust Lane Kiffin's offense to score enough and let up enough points. But is Arkansas going to take advantage? That's what you're watching for.
I'll be interested to see how much that line moves by Saturday. Who knows? There could be a bunch of people hammering that under, which makes that number go down.
No, maybe. I mean, as Barstool Big Cat says, life's too short to bet the under. That's also your line too. I think.
I agree with Big Cat on that one, yeah.